Hi everyone, thank you for joining us. I'm Abbie, I'm a digital channel manager here at Your Overseas Home. Today we're going to be talking about something that often gets overlooked early on in the overseas buying journey, and that's setting a realistic budget.
Awesome. Hi, I'm Julian. I'm one of the writers here at Your Overseas Home. I deal with a lot of the countries we're going to be talking about today. Yeah, as Abbie was saying, this is a particularly important part of the buying process that you need to take a look at.
Definitely. If you don't know already, this is actually the third session in our series on how to buy a property overseas. If you missed last month, we discussed how to pick the right location for your lifestyle and needs. If you did miss it, you can actually head over to the on-demand section of our website and you can watch it back. Or if you managed to see it and you want a refresher, you can also go ahead and watch that back as well. Today, we're covering things like the key fees and taxes in popular countries that we cover in this session. Now, the costs do often catch people out, and we're going to cover some of the ways that you can save a little bit along the way. The important thing to remember with all of this is that these are kind of guidelines, and the region you buy in, the type of property you buy will massively impact the fees and the taxes included. So if you do see a property you love, just make sure that you ask your estate agent all of the questions first, so that you know exactly what that property might have attached to it in terms of extra costs. So just a little disclaimer there before we get into everything. Now, just quickly, if you are new to Your Overseas Home and you've not attended one of our sessions before, as a quick reminder, we're here to make your overseas buying process as straightforward as possible. So we run webinars like this. We also host virtual events twice a year. We offer one-to-one support over the phone, and we're able to connect buyers just like yourself with vetted property professionals overseas.
Absolutely. Basically, if you're thinking about buying overseas, somewhere sunny, we can help make that happen with as little stress as possible, but put you in touch with everyone involved.
Yeah, exactly. Now, we're going to do something a little bit different this session, which is new for us. So we'd love, if you are watching this live, if you would try a little poll for us. So the quick question we have is, before starting this session, what do you think you would need to set aside as additional fees as a percentage of the property price? So we've got four options up here: 1 to 2%, 3 to 5%, 5 to 10%, and 10 to 15%. If you'd pop what you think, that would be great.
You should be able to see the poll on screen. If not, do message us on the question box on the side. And let's just see how much you think. By the end of the session, you'll know how much to set aside, but we will give the answer if it's not been clearly said throughout the presentation.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's always great to start with what people think, because sometimes people get it, nail on the head. They've guessed it correctly, but some people think it's so much more or so much less. So it's kind of nice to get a feel for what everyone thinks. We'll leave it up for a couple more seconds, and then we'll get into all of the fees and all of the different countries as well. Okay, so it is really common. We hear this a lot. Most buyers, when asked their budget, are focusing exactly on how much they can spend on a property. So people will say, I want £250,000 for a property. I've seen a 3-bed villa I like, and that's what I'm going to spend. And they don't think about how much they need to set aside. So reality is you need to factor in a fair few things. So that's things like your legal fees, local taxes, things like council tax, when you're actually living there, your property tax, stamp duty, things like that. But also kind of basic things like furnishing your property, maybe exchange rates, so on and so forth. The list really does go on.
Absolutely. And so, I mean, if you're buying a property anywhere in the world, be it your own home country or overseas, you'll be familiar with the idea of relocation fees or removals, things like this. But when buying a property abroad, you will need to take into account a couple of surprise ones, or might discover that the fees are slightly larger than you've been expecting in the past. And the reason why you want to take the time now to work out a realistic budget is it makes sure you don't put an offer in on somewhere which is actually outside of your budget and causes stress out down the line, either derailing your plans completely or setting you into a house where you are really stretched thin and not able to enjoy the overseas life that you've set yourself up for.
Yeah, definitely. And the reality is, as with buying in the UK, most of these costs are predictable, but it's important to make sure that you have these budgeted. I mean, in some countries like France, if you haven't set the budget aside for the fees and you sign the compromis de bond, for instance, like you're kind of tied in at that point. You can get out, but you might lose out on a deposit and things like that. If you've not set aside your money for a deposit, not only might you have lost out on kind of your dream home, and you might have lost some cash along the way as well. So it's worthwhile kind of preparing yourself for these things and keeping the fees and the extra costs straight in your mind so that if you do see a home you love, you know if it's something you can afford or not. So speaking of France.
Yeah, so let's start with France, which is a big favourite of a lot of UK residents when they're looking to move abroad. It's obviously got great easy access just over the channel. One of the things which is a vital part of buying in France is that you will go through a notaire or a notary. It's a part of by law, you need to use a notary. So these are fees which you can't avoid. They are on top of also having a solicitor. They will also include your stamp duty fees there. Your legal fees will be about roughly 1% on top of that. And so in total, you're looking at around 8 to 10% on top of the purchase price. Again, we're telling you this, and we're going to go through a lot of numbers in the slides ahead, because these are things you do need to be aware of when you're looking at purchasing in France or anywhere overseas.
Yeah, there's going to be a fair few numbers in this presentation, but sadly, that's unfortunately how taxes work. I mean, the thing with France, I think, is this might seem high. I think the notaire fees in particular, kind of that 7 to 8% just on one service seems like a bit of a shock to some people. The reality is they're very regulated. It's very clear before you go in exactly how much they will be. They do communicate quite well in France, actually, and you do at least know kind of exactly what you're spending that percentage on. Some of the countries are slightly less, straightforward, and there are some kind of more grey areas. So maybe France is actually kind of the one that feels the most easy, actually. Okay, let's now head over to Spain. So in Spain, this is the one that I think is most true to what we spoke about in the beginning, that the region you're buying in, where you're buying, and importantly, whether you are buying a new build or a resale will make all of these numbers fluctuate fairly massively, actually. I mean, you can see here, so you'll have a transfer tax that can be anywhere from 6 to 10%. Again, that can be a huge difference region to region, and that is dictated by region. You're also going to have your stamp duty, that's between 0.5 and 1.5%. Legal fees are again about 1% of the property price. Now, usually with legal fees, and this is kind of across all countries, it tends to be most lawyers will have a flat fee under a certain value of property. It's usually kind of under the £250,000 mark. There tends to be more of a flat fee, but on average, it's about 1% of the property price, and it's worthwhile checking with your lawyer beforehand to make sure that that's kind of clear. They'll always give you a full package deal. If you're looking to relocate, some things will be slightly more expensive, but they often build you up a package so that that's really clear beforehand, and so that they can help you with things like that. And then actually in Spain, agent fees are usually paid by the seller, but again, it's worth making sure that you do speak to your estate agent about that. I think the key theme in all of this is going to be to speak to your estate agent. If you see a property you love, ask questions about all of these fees that we have here, so that it's really clear in your mind exactly what you'll be paying for that particular property.
Absolutely. And so actually looking at this, one of the things which you could take away from this, and what you should really remember if you are trying to buy in Spain, if you are looking at the country as a whole and you don't yet know which region you're going to be buying in, just factor that in, that when you start looking at a house, find out what that region's fees are. If you already know the region that you're interested in, you can go online, you can look it up, you can find out exactly what that regional fee is, and you've got that as a fixed number in your head that you can work with when budgeting. It's just something which you need to keep in mind when you're looking in Spain. The other thing that's worth keeping in mind is that if it's a new build, you'll be dealing with VAT instead of a transfer tax, and that comes in at about 10%. So again, it's that sort of situation where it's like there are some of these numbers where if you know the region or the kind of house that you're looking to buy, you can start sort of getting quite clear ideas of exactly what it would be that you'd be paying on top of the purchase price.
Yeah, definitely. And if you're working with a reputable estate agent, they will cover all of this before you put an offer in. So just make sure to ask questions. And again, the right agents will make sure this is all clear for you. So don't worry too much about this. But let's move on now to Portugal. Now, Portugal is a little bit more straightforward. Now, once again, you can see that the transfer tax is quite a range. So it's 2 to 8%, depending on the property value. So again, think about how much your budget is and then start looking at them and then speak to your agents again about exactly how much that will be. Now, stamp duty is a set amount, that's 0.8%. And then the legal fees in Portugal are between 1 and 2% usually. So perhaps slightly more, but again, it's not a huge kind of difference. And so on average, about 7 to 10% of the property price you will need to set aside ahead of purchasing in Portugal.
Also, and as I was saying, that transfer tax between 2 or 8% is quite a large spectrum. But actually, most modest properties within Portugal are going to fall into that lower end of the scale. It's only when you're sort of looking at the plus 1 million that you're sort of getting towards the 8% number. So a lot of the places you might be looking at will actually fall to the lower end of the spectrum.
Exactly. Now, we're moving on. I know this is a lot of numbers for everyone, and so hopefully this is at least interesting for everybody. But yeah, next up is Italy. Julian, I don't know if you want to cover this one. I've said a lot of numbers recently.
So yeah, so with Italy, as with all these countries, there's specific things about it which make it, let's say, unique rather than complicated. In Italy, the tax depends on whether it's your main home or not. So as you can see, if you're setting up as a main home, the registration tax is much lower. It's only when you start looking at second homes or adding to a portfolio that you start looking at a larger tax that you're going to need to set aside in your budget. Legal and agent fees, they're combined. They're around sort of 4 to 7%. So again, this could be something where if you're looking at the right price property and it's going to be your main home, you might actually find yourself at a lower end of the spectrum. It's only when you start looking at higher value properties, your second property, third property, that you're going to start paying those larger numbers. And so, yeah, in total, you're probably looking between sort of 7 and 10% to set aside when buying in Italy.
Yeah, definitely. And look, agents' fees are often paid by the buyer. Check with your agent, with the agent you're working with first. I know some of our contacts are things like property finders, and oftentimes they will handle that side of things and do a kind of a level of bartering for you. It's worth just speaking again and figuring that out. Italy is one of those that has I guess a couple grey areas in terms of those agent fees. So again, just have a chat with your agent beforehand. Just make sure you understand that, but ideally set it aside either way. That way you're covered if anything does come up. Now, Greece, actually not quite nice and simple. It's really 3% for your property transfer tax. Your notary and legal fees, again, in Greece, you will need a notary, and it's always very sensible to have your independent lawyer in all of these countries. It's worth doing both. You're going to be at about 2.54% to cover both of those. And then agents fees, again, these ones are more kind of covered by the buyer and the seller, usually split both ways, so about 2%. Again, just check with your agent, make sure that that's definitely the case. It's much more common in Greece, though, for it to be an even split. So always kind of think about that and make sure you're covered on that side.
I would also say one of the other benefits of buying in Greece is that as part of the sales process, the seller is going to have to perform a survey of the property. So you actually have a lot of information about the property you're looking at before you buy it. This is obviously different to other countries around Europe, particularly in the UK, where it's the buyer who has to do the survey. While that might give you sort of more negotiation room when it's in the UK, because you're discovering things that the seller may not know about their property, in Greece, you at least are going into this purchase with your eyes open. You have a much clearer idea of what it is that you're going to be getting into, which, as we'll talk in a little bit about, when you are setting aside your budget for your property, part of that is going to be looking at, well, make sure you've got money for renovations, for repairs. So basically, you have a clearer idea of what it is that you might need to perform for the property before you move in. The last piece of advice on Greece is also always hire an independent lawyer, not one who comes recommended by the agent. It's especially important in Greece, just because there's fewer, it's a less regulated market, and so it's quite good to make sure that the experts you're dealing with are ones that you've found yourself, be it through recommendations, reviews. Do speak to us. We work with a lot of partners in Greece. We might be able to put you in contact with someone who'd be able to help you. Just you want to make sure that when you're dealing with a purchase in Greece, you've got all the right people on your side.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's the most sensible thing to do, I mean, with every country, but yeah, particularly Greece. Now moving over to our last country, you'll be pleased to know the numbers might dial down a little bit moving forward. So Cyprus is quite similar to Spain in the sense that there is the VAT applied to new builds. So it's worth kind of considering that when you are deciding whether you are going to buy a resale or a new build. So again, in Cyprus, we've got a fairly broad range of transfer fees. It's 3 to 8%. Again, it depends on the value, but that percentage is also reduced if VAT is applied. The VAT on new builds is 19%, and you can see here that there is a reduction based on the size for a main residence. So again, worth keeping in mind if you are looking at properties around this kind of size. Have a think and see if, perhaps keeping to the lower end of that is better for you, so that you can kind of save yourself 14% on VAT. Your stamp duty though is up to 0.2%, and again, as with most countries, your legal fees are going to be around a percentage of the property price. So that takes you to about 8 to 12% overall, VAT inclusive, of course.
So Abbie did say this was going to be so the number's going to ramp down, but I'm aware what's on the next slide. So
yeah.
If you
I think this is our final. I hope this is our final bunch of numbers. I think the thing is, you can look at all of this side by side, and you can see that most of them are they're similar. We're talking 8 to 10, 8 to 12, 7 to 9. It's not a huge difference. The difference really is how they're broken down country by country, and sort of the ways to think about them. If, for instance, in Spain, if you've got quite a tight budget, and same with Cyprus, maybe a new build isn't the right thing for you if that's going to really topple the budget over the edge. So these are the things that are kind of, I guess, worth considering.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things which we've talked about in all of the episodes of this series so far, and I'm sure it's going to come up again, is this idea of red lines, and almost this idea of you work out exactly what it is you're wanting to live in, and it will make the choice much, much easier. If you know that you're wanting a new build, then look at the countries which make new builds more affordable. If you're looking to buy a property which you're going to be renovating, then work out whether it's going to be a country which will reward it being a resale property, or one like Greece, which already has the surveys done for you. It's these sorts of things where once you work out what sort of property you're looking for, what sort of a job you're willing to take on, be it in terms of renovations or moving into an area where there's development going on around you, then it will make some of these choices much easier. These numbers, they'll stop looking like a range for 8 to 12%, and it'll be a clear 8% or a clear 12%. You'll know going into it exactly what it is you're going to be paying on top of the purchase price.
Exactly. I think we've probably spoken about red lines in this series more than anything, but it is the most important thing to think about. You always usually write out, wants and needs and things like that. And I think when you're buying overseas, those are just the things that you need to kind of prioritize a lot more. Now, yes, we are saying kind of 7 to 12% is roughly the amount across each country. We do, however, recommend, as a sort of fairly, solid recommendation and piece of guidance for you, set aside 10 to 15%. It's unlikely that you'll need all of it, but if there are any unexpected costs, I mean, we were talking earlier, Julian, both of us, I've you know, I've purchased a flat, I think you're in the process of, and both of us have had to extend floor plans. And I had to pay for, you know, the extension of a floor plan onto mine. You're doing the same. And that was a cost that I did not predict. And I'm so glad I, in the UK, set aside more money than I needed for things like that. Because if I hadn't, I actually don't know what I would have done. I might have just had to either leave it and risk it being missing out of the floor plan, or you know, completely pull out of the sale altogether. And that would have been very annoying. It was like a week before I was supposed to complete. So we would say set yourself aside 10 to 15%. It's so much nicer to have money left over, you know, buy yourself a nice bottle of champagne, maybe a nice new sofa, than a last minute panic of, you know, trying to cobble together, you know, some fees for something that you misplaced. So we're always going to say set yourself 10 to 15%. It's so much safer that way. Have a buffer. And also there are other things that you might want to consider, which we're kind of going to go into now. So beyond the purchase price.
Yeah, absolutely. So well, also the other thing I would just say on that before getting into some of these additional costs is just remember that if you're buying overseas, the difference between buying at home and discovering that there's suddenly a surprise extra payment that has to be done is that you're in the same country as your solicitors, you're speaking the same language as your solicitors. If this happens when you're doing an overseas purchase, the possibility for extra stress is significant. You're working with potentially in different time zones. You're going to be working with people who may have different first languages, and so you just don't want that sort of stuff all jumping on in those last weeks of a purchase. And that's why setting that buffer up, getting that budget set aside, just so that sort of the stressful thing for you is not where's the money coming from, it's just how quickly can I get this thing sorted. But yes, so let's talk about beyond the purchase price. So there are a few things which people often forget when they're moving overseas, or they don't necessarily put enough money aside for them. Furnishing and renovation. Obviously, depending on the size of your property, the quality or style of furniture you're going to be wanting will vary wildly on this cost, but it might be as much as €50,000. And if you've got a 2, 3, 4 bedroom villa that you're looking to buy, and you're having to buy all of that furniture locally, or you're getting it shipped across from another part of the country, that price can get quite high quite quickly. And so keep it in mind that you don't want to be living in a completely empty house. Then also travel and insurance. You know, you're buying overseas not necessarily just to be in the one place that you've chosen to buy. You're going to want to see that country. You're going to want to be able to travel to that country. If this is a holiday home and you're planning on going 3 weekends out of the year, or for a week-long trip in the summer and then a week in winter, you know, set money aside for that. You want to actually be able to see this home, and you're going to want to insure that home. You're not going to be there all year round, and so that's something which you're going to need to make sure that, you know, the property is looked after while you're not there. And then also there's the annual property taxes. This is going to vary massively about which country you're living in, or which country you're buying in, but you know, you're going to be paying something to the government of that country. And so don't just look at the purchase price, look at some of the other fees and prices which are going to be part of you buying a property there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, also, you know, thinking about renovation and things like that, what if you hate the bathroom? You know, you might want that redoing. The best thing you can do as well with things like this is speak to, oftentimes the estate agents are expats themselves, or they have an expat on their team. Speak to them and say, you know, if I don't like the kitchen, roughly how much is it to get a kitchen done in this area? They'll probably know some local tradesmen anyway, but they can also give you an idea of roughly what you need to set aside. So worth thinking about. Also, things to ask your agent: roughly how much are utilities? You are going to want Wi-Fi, even if this is your holiday home. Chances are you're going to want to be able to connect to the internet. How much are, you know, gas, water, things like that. And if this is a second home, either a holiday home or something that you are renting out, in particular if it's something you plan to rent out, chances are you may want a property management company to help you out. So have a think about if that's something you'll want, and then ask. Your agents will always have property, if they don't have a property management arm of the company, or most of them do, they will know property managers in the area, and you can get quotes on how much that would look like annually. Make sure you've got that set aside. If you're not going to be in the area, you're planning to rent it out, I think the peace of mind of having someone there who can help you out is something that we hear a lot of people wanting. So price that up if that's something that you think will be important for you. Now, one of the things that we like to talk about is avoidable extra costs. So things that you can do to make sure that you don't have to spend more on your property. We didn't include this in your percentages because there are ways to mitigate this. You've probably heard us talking about it before, but currency exchange is one of the biggest ways that you can accidentally end up spending a lot more than you think, alongside some other key things like duplicating your agent fees. Just make sure you're speaking to them and you're clear on everything. If you miss any payment deadlines, you can incur extra costs. And then, yes, of course, the exchange rate can cost you a little bit more. And people often leave this to the last second. I don't know, Julian, if you want to kind of give a little bit of an example on how that could impact people.
Yeah, sure thing. There's a few ways to talk about this. First, let's say that you're transferring £250,000. A small swing in the exchange rate, 2-3%, can mean thousands of extra pounds. Basically, that at the end of that point, when you're at the point of completion, if the exchange rate's gone against you, then your purchase price, say it's a €300,000 home, that's remaining fixed. And if the pound's not getting you as much money, you need to find the extra pounds to now transfer to get that €300,000. I mean, another way of looking at it, if you're a US resident who is buying in Europe this year, since January, the dollar has dropped in value against the euro by about 15%. That's a huge change in value. So if you've not fixed that exchange rate, then you're going to be looking at having to find an extra 10% in your budget to just meet the sell price of that property.
Yeah, and the reality is anything happening globally can have an impact, or in fact will have an impact on your currency exchange rate. We don't know what will happen to them. There is no way to predict an exchange rate. Some people might try. There is no way. We never know what's going to happen minute by minute, hour by hour. And every second they are changing. In the time that it has taken us to start this slide to the time that I'm talking right now, the exchange rate has shifted. We put an example here. So £500,000 in the last 12 months. We've had a fairly volatile year at times, but in the last 12 months alone, and actually I could have shown you this in the last 6 months, and it was a very similar value. I just kind of thought showing you a whole year is quite useful to see. I think it was about €31,000 over 6 months, but you could have lost nearly €36,000 by not locking in your exchange rate. I mean, that is already not shy from 10% of your budget. So if you're already at, maybe 12% on your extra fees, you could rack up at this point, 20% on top of your budget with fees and currency exchange fluctuations. Thankfully, there are ways to mitigate it. You actually will have just missed a currency exchange webinar earlier today. Danny Cook from Smart Currency Exchange was speaking to our own Bampton earlier about this exact thing. So if you haven't watched that and you want to know a little bit more from someone slightly more qualified from Julian and myself, you can actually watch that on demand. But effectively, you can lock in your exchange rate using things like forward contracts. There's no transfer fees, and you'll have one-to-one support from a currency exchange specialist who will basically hold your hand through the whole way and make what can feel like a slightly complicated situation a little bit easier. So this is one of those things that's avoidable and is worth thinking about early on. Don't leave this till the last minute. It can just cost you so much more than you think. So just want to flag. I know we are coming up a little bit to time, but we have a couple questions. So I think it'd be worth answering these just before we head off and end our Thursday.
Well, so I would say just quickly on this, I know that we've focused a lot on this, and this is probably the scariest slide and the biggest expense that we're talking about. It's because a lot of the other stuff that we've talked about today, it's like they are fixed fees, they're fixed rates. Yes, there was a spectrum, but it's the idea of you work out the value of the house you're buying, you know how much the cost is going to be. This is the one aspect where, if you leave it to the market, you don't really have control over this. It's only by actually going through a currency expert, that you're able to lock in an exchange rate and get back some control over the market. As Abbie was saying, the exchange rates are changing every day, and so like this is just something which is worth flagging, because also you'll only deal with this when you're buying overseas, and so it's just important to, if it's not an idea you've come across before, just to make sure that you're aware of it.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, let's have a look at a couple of these questions. So we've had one talking about in particular what's happening in Spain at the moment. So saying, heard that the Spanish Prime Minister is considering the introduction of 100% tax on properties for foreign. I might have disconnected there for a moment.
Sorry, Julian. I think you might have slightly disconnected there, but I will quickly cover this question about the 100% tax. I think the thing to remember, this one comes up in pretty much every webinar we talk about Spain in. The thing to remember is this is just a headline right now. We did a webinar with one of our partners earlier this year, which we will be more than happy to send over to you so you can watch. You can also catch it on demand in the Spain section of our on-demand webinars. Our lawyers went into quite a bit of detail regarding it, so that's worth watching. As a kind of quick answer for you now, I mean, I think that webinar was an hour long, so you can kind of get the feel for how much detail you can go into in this topic. For now, the overall kind of opinion is this is the headline right now. It's not been passed. It's not, we don't know if it will be. We probably would say it's unlikely to happen at a 100% tax. But if it's something you're concerned about, but you really want to buy in Spain, we'll be able to put you in touch with the lawyers who can hold your hand all the way through that process and make sure that if there are any changes, you're completely aware of them and prepared for that. So yes, it sounds scary, but it's not anything necessarily yet, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I mean, Abbie, I don't know if you want to answer this question about cadastral.
I can cover this. Yeah. So cadastral tax in Italy is technically just property registration. It's just their kind of word for it. That's the tax that can be 2% or 9%. So worth considering, again, like Julian mentioned, if you're building up a portfolio, but that 9% is quite a steep increase. It's just how they call property registration, basically. So it's just another simple kind of tax to think about, but yeah, worth kind of flagging that 9% tax if you do have multiple homes.
Awesome. And so I think actually one of the other things that's worth talking about here is that we've just gone through so many slides with so many numbers, and it may well sound like, right, you're buying a house overseas and then there's this price on top, this price on top, this price on top. And suddenly it sounds scary. It sounds potentially that what was a wonderful dream is now sounding wrapped up in finance and big numbers, and it's scary. It really does boil down to that rule which Abbie's been saying, whereas like, you know, look at the value of the property that you're looking at, add 10 or 15%. If you add 15%, you are going to be covering pretty much every cost that is going to be associated with buying that property. This is the thing where it's like, speak to the estate agent as you're going in, talk to your lawyers as you're going through it, have a think about what sort of furnishings you'll need, how you're going to get your furniture out there if you're transporting it. But between starting your search and actually exchanging on a property, you can find out so much information about the cost that's involved, and you can get flesh to that dream, and it becomes real. And it's very easy to look at numbers on the screen, or charts of exchange rates in particular, always terrifying. I, unfortunately for my job, start most of my days looking at the exchange rate and seeing how it's gone up or down. And it is a worrying thing to look at, but it's all stuff which people have gone through many, many times before. If you've got any questions about this, if you've got like a specific situation that you want to talk through, just book a call with one of our consultants and just explain your situation. They deal with people every day who are going through the same process that you're going through, and they can answer so many of your questions, or they can put you in touch with a local expert who will be able to answer your questions as well and give you information you wouldn't even known to have asked for. So yes, I feel like at the end of all of our webinars, we're going to get into a situation where we're describing something quite scary. It's just that we're trying to give a bit of reality to the dream, and sometimes the reality is a little bit scary.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I don't know. I think we say it's scary. The reality is it's not, if you are prepared. A lot of people go into buying a home overseas and they just think, yeah, I just go in, I find an estate agent, I say I like this property and I buy it. There are things you have to consider when you're buying in another country. And the whole purpose of this series is to prepare you for all those. We know most people who join us in these sessions are very early on in the journey. And so we're just here to give you that bigger picture that then helps you go, okay, my dream is possible. I just need to be aware of things. And that's kind of how buying a home goes everywhere, really. Now, what next? So, as you know, we dive deep into every single step of the journey. So next month, we are covering how to understand legal processes when buying overseas. Hopefully, far less numerical data in this one, but we'll see. And that one is on July 10th, again at the same time, so 4:30 UK time. And in terms of what you can do, Julian's kind of covered a fair few things that we offer here already. So we do have that one-to-one capacity with our property consultants, where you can give them a call and ask them any questions you have. They'll be able to pop you in touch with any relevant contacts at this stage, or they'll be on hand to support you through the entire journey as you kind of get closer to that property buying stage. So that's one thing. In the meantime, we also run webinars every week. We've had 3 today. So there's always plenty content going out. And so if you do want to get more specific and hear from our partners, you can sign up for any of our webinars that are upcoming. And additionally, very excitingly, we do have our virtual property show, the Your Overseas Home virtual event, coming up on October 4th of this year. And this is a great place to start meeting all of the partners that we have, watching all of our seminars live on the day, and having chats with anyone that you would like to know a little bit more about. So that's everything that we kind of do here, and there should be a fair few links on the screen now if any of that is interesting for you. And then finally, if you have enjoyed today's session, we've enjoyed having you here and it's been great to kind of talk through the budgeting side of things. But if you have enjoyed it yourself, if you could leave us a review on Trustpilot, let us know how we've done. It would be great to get your feedback. And additionally, if there's anything you'd like to see from us, drop us a message in the questions tab now, and we can make sure to add that into our kind of plan going ahead for these webinar sessions. We want to make sure we're answering the questions you have, not just kind of going off what we think you might want to hear.
Sounds
Yeah,
good.
I mean,
well, thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you for your questions, and thank you for your patience as we went through so many numbers for so many countries.
yeah,
And as Abbie says, we'll see you in the next session.
yeah, hope to see you all there.